Brian Thompson's day had started before the sun even rose. The shrill buzz of his alarm sliced through the stillness of his small apartment at 4:45 a.m. He groaned as he sat up, his back stiff from another night on the sagging couch. His daughter, Lily, had the only bedroom, and Brian made sure she had as much comfort as he could manage on his limited income. He padded across the cold kitchen floor in his socks, brewed the cheapest coffee he could find, and mentally prepared for another long day of double shifts at the diner. By the time his shift ended at 2 p.m., Brian's feet ached, his apron was stained with ketchup and grease, and he was running low on patience. But there was no time to rest. He had exactly 30 minutes to get to the grocery store, grab diapers, milk, and a few cans of soup, then pick up Lily from daycare before the late fee kicked in, again. He checked his wallet. $43. That had to stretch until next Friday. The grocery store was crowded, and the checkout lines were slow. Brian could feel the tension building in his chest, a familiar weight that seemed to cling to him constantly. When the cashier scanned the diapers, he watched the numbers on the screen with dread. $11,999. He sighed in relief. It was less than he expected. Every few cents counted. Once the groceries were packed into the torn trunk of his rust-speckled sedan, Brian climbed in and cranked the engine. It sputtered before roaring to life, rattling as if held together more by hope than hardware. He merged onto the highway, keeping one eye on the clock and the other on the road, mentally calculating if he could make it to daycare in time. That's when he saw her. A sleek black car, looked like a BMW or maybe a Lexus, was pulled over. On the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking a desperate rhythm. Next to it stood a woman in a crisp white blouse and navy slacks, tapping at her phone and glancing nervously at the flat tire. Cars sped past her without a second glance, and though Brian had every reason to keep driving, something pulled at him. Maybe it was the helpless look on her face. Maybe it was the nagging voice of his mother, who always told him, "Do right by others, even if the world doesn't do right by you." Or maybe, just maybe, it was because Brian knew what it felt like to be stranded, hoping someone, anyone, might care enough to stop. He slowed and pulled onto the shoulder a few feet ahead of her car, flicking on his own hazard lights. As he stepped out, gravel crunching beneath his worn sneakers, the woman turned, surprised. Her eyes widened slightly, but then softened with relief. "Hey," Brian called, giving a small wave. "Need a hand?" The woman hesitated, then offered, a sheepish smile. "Yes, please. I can't even find the jack." Brian nodded and walked over, already kneeling to inspect the damage. The tire was completely flat, and the luxury car clearly hadn't seen much roadside action. He popped the trunk, quickly locating the jack, tire iron, and the donut spare. The tools were pristine, like they'd never been used. He chuckled softly. "You're lucky it's just a flat," he said, glancing up. "Could be worse." "I wouldn't know," the woman admitted, her arms folded across her chest. "I've never had to change one before." "No worries," Brian replied, rolling up his sleeves. "I've had to do this more times than I can count." As he worked, the woman crouched nearby, keeping her distance but clearly curious. She watched his hands move swiftly, his brow furrowed in concentration. Despite the sweat glistening on his temple and the grime building under his nails, he was calm, methodical, almost graceful in how he handled the tools. "Thank you for stopping," she said after a moment. "No one else even slowed down." Brian shrugged. "Most people don't, but I couldn't just drive past." "You must be in a hurry." "I am," he admitted. "Need to pick up my daughter. She's 3. I'm a single dad." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. Really? That can't be easy. It's not, he said, tightening the lug nuts. But she's my everything. She was silent for a few moments, as if taking that in. Brian noticed how her blouse was immaculately pressed, how her shoes didn't have a speck of dirt on them. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a boardroom, completely out of place on the side of a highway. But she wasn't rude or dismissive. She was watching him the way someone watches a person who doesn't quite fit the mold. When he finished, Brian stood and wiped his hands on a rag from his back pocket. "You're all set. Just take it easy until you get that tire replaced." She reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "Please, I insist." Brian held up his hands, taking a step back. "I can't take that. I didn't do it for money." Her hand wavered in the air. "Then why?" He looked at her, sincerity written in every line of his face. "Because I hope that if my daughter ever breaks down on the side of the road, someone will stop and help her too. That's enough reason for me." The woman stared at him, speechless. For a moment, the traffic disappeared. The noise of the world faded, and there was only the weight of that sentence between them. She slowly lowered the bill, slipping it back into her purse. "Well," she said quietly, "thank you. Truly." Brian gave her a polite nod, jogged back to his car, and pulled away into traffic. His hands were filthy, his clothes stained from kneeling on hot pavement, and he was now definitely late to daycare, but somehow his chest felt lighter. He had no idea that this small act, this simple, selfless gesture, was about to change everything. Brian didn't think much about the woman after he pulled back onto the highway. His mind quickly returned to the ticking clock and the late fees that piled up like bricks every time he was more than 10 minutes late picking up Lily. He barely made it to the daycare in time, his heart thudding in his chest as he jogged up. The cracked steps and through the front door, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor. Lily, with her untamed curls and gap-toothed smile, ran to him with arms wide open. "Daddy!" she squealed. He scooped her up and held her tightly, breathing in the sweet smell of peanut butter and crayons. The daycare worker gave him a knowing look. She'd seen the struggle in his eyes before. Brian gave a quick nod of thanks, his mind already skipping, ahead to dinner, bath time, and the mountain of laundry waiting at home. That night, after Lily fell asleep curled up with her stuffed giraffe, Brian sat on the couch with a bowl of cheap instant noodles and a pile of unopened bills. The fan hummed in the corner, barely cooling the room, and the silence was both a relief and a reminder of how alone he was, of how little support he had. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He had made peace with his reality. But some nights, it still pressed down on him like a second gravity. A few days passed. The moment on the highway became just another one of those odd, out-of-place experiences that stick in your mind but fade behind the more immediate worries of life. Brian didn't expect anything to come of it. Why would he? He hadn't even caught the woman's last name. She'd been kind, sure, and clearly well off, but their worlds were miles apart. She probably forgot about him the second she got back into her shiny car. But he was wrong. The call came the following Thursday, while he was on a break behind the diner. He'd just stepped out into the alley to smoke a cigarette he shouldn't have been smoking, his apron stained from the lunchtime rush. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he answered without checking the number. "Hello? Hi, is this Brian Thompson?" The voice was clear, confident, familiar in a strange way. "Yeah," speaking. "It's Claire Donovan, from the highway, last week." He blinked, unsure whether he was hearing right. "Oh, wow, hi. I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know this is out of the blue," she said, her tone warmer now. "But I've been thinking about our conversation, about your daughter, about what you said." Brian leaned against the brick wall, the cigarette forgotten between his fingers. "What about it?" "I wanted to meet. In person. Talk a little more. If you're willing." He hesitated. "Are you okay? I mean, did something happen?" She laughed, a soft, amused sound. "No, nothing happened. Actually, something's been happening for a long time, and meeting you reminded me of it." Still confused, but intrigued, Brian agreed. They met at a cafe near downtown 2 days later. Brian borrowed a button-up shirt from his neighbor and did his best to look presentable. Claire was already seated when he arrived, dressed casually, this time with her hair pulled back and a cup of tea in front of her. "You clean up well," she said with a teasing smile as he sat down. Brian chuckled nervously. "I had to borrow this. My wardrobe isn't exactly made for fancy places." "This place isn't fancy," she said. "But I get it." There was a pause as they both studied each other. Claire was nothing like how she'd seemed on the roadside. She was sharper now, more confident, but not intimidating. She had a calm energy that made Brian feel both out of place and strangely comfortable. "I'll get straight to the point," she said. "I wasn't entirely honest with you that day. I wasn't just some woman with car trouble." Brian raised an eyebrow. "I figured you weren't the average commuter. You looked like you owned the road," she smiled. "Close. I own a tech company, a startup that did well, really well. We went public 2 years ago. I also run a foundation, something I started after my mother passed. She was a single mom. I watched her work herself into the ground trying to raise me, and I swore that one day I'd help people like her." Brian leaned back slowly, absorbing her words. "So, why me?" Claire's gaze didn't waver. "Because you stopped. You didn't know who I was, and you had every reason to keep driving. But you didn't. And then you said something that's been echoing in my mind ever since." He frowned. "What did I say?" "You said, 'I just hope someone helps my daughter someday.' That hit me hard, because I remember my mom saying something almost identical when I was a kid, and it made me realize I have resources, I have reach, but I don't have people like you, people who understand." Brian looked down at his calloused hands. "I'm just a waiter, Claire. No, you're a father who shows up, who teaches kindness by example, who makes time for others, even when you're running on empty. That's the kind of person I want on my team." He looked up, unsure how to respond. "I run a foundation that helps single parents get back on their feet. Housing assistance, job training, education grants, all of it. But we've been missing something. Someone to help us connect with the people we're trying to serve. I want you to come work for me." Brian blinked. "Doing what?" "Outreach. Real stories. Real people. You'll meet with families, understand what they need, help build programs that actually work. And you'll be paid well. Benefits too." His throat tightened. "Are you serious?" "As serious as I've ever been." He sat in silence, stunned. The clinking of coffee cups and quiet hum of conversation faded around him. All he could think about was Lily, about the nights he'd gone without dinner so she could eat, about the times he'd pretended everything was fine when they had $20 to their name. And now, this woman, this stranger, was offering him not a handout, but a purpose. Brian finally found his voice. "Why me, Claire?" Really? She smiled. Because you're exactly the kind of person who should be leading change. And because you already changed my life by reminding me of what matters. And in that quiet cafe, something inside Brian shifted. For the first time in years, the future didn't look like a wall he had to climb. It looked like a door finally opening. The first day at the foundation felt like stepping into another world. Brian stood in the lobby of the Donovan Outreach Center, clutching a modest messenger bag that held little more than a notebook, a half-used pen, and a snack Lily had insisted he bring in case you get hungry, Daddy. The place was sleek and modern, with soft lighting, a calming color palette, and a gentle scent of coffee and something faintly citrusy in the air. People bustled around, well-dressed but not flashy, smiling and nodding at one another with genuine warmth. There were framed photos of families on the walls, real families, not stock images. A mother holding her toddler at a new apartment, a father reading to his son in what looked like a library, a young woman graduating in cap and gown. Brian was early, having taken 2 buses to get there just to avoid the risk of his old sedan breaking down. He had checked and rechecked the directions 6 times, dressed in the nicest clothes he owned, khakis and a button-down shirt that didn't quite fit but was clean and wrinkle-free. He felt out of place, like he'd accidentally wandered into the wrong building. Claire arrived right on time, her presence warm and composed as always. "You made it," she said, with an encouraging smile. "I wasn't sure what to wear," Brian admitted with a self-conscious glance down. "You're perfect," she said without hesitation. "Come on, let me show you around." She introduced him to the team, case managers, educators, counselors, and a few other outreach coordinators. Brian was surprised to learn many of them had once been recipients of the very help they now provided. They greeted him with an ease he hadn't expected, and it didn't take long before the nerves gave way to something he hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. His first assignment wasn't glamorous. He shadowed 2 staffers during visits to low-income neighborhoods, observing how they spoke with families, how they listened without judgment, how they found resources and offered practical, actionable support. At first, Brian didn't say much. He watched, he listened, he learned. Slowly, he began to see how his own experience wasn't a weakness, it was his strength. He began taking on his own cases within weeks. There was Maria, a young mother of 2 escaping an abusive relationship, unsure how to start over. Brian met her in the corner of a shelter's playroom, her eyes darting nervously as her children played nearby. He didn't come at her with checklists or protocols. He told her about Lily, about the time he slept in his car for 3 nights after losing his apartment. Her eyes softened. She listened. And when he handed her the pamphlet for a transitional housing program, she took it. There was Devon, a recently unemployed father who had lost custody of his son and didn't know where to turn. Brian sat with him in a coffee shop and told him about the nights he'd worked double shifts just to afford daycare. "You're not alone," he said. "You're not the only one." They spoke for 2 hours. Word began to spread. Families trusted him. He wasn't just another polished professional with a clipboard. He was one of them. He had lived it, survived it, and now he was helping others do the same. Claire noticed, too. "You've got something rare, Brian," she said, one evening after he gave a short talk at a local community center. "They don't just listen to you, they believe you. That's power. Use it." In time, she invited him to strategy meetings. He sat at tables with people in tailored suits and talked about barriers no textbook could explain. He spoke about The shame that came with asking for help, about the systemic traps that kept people from getting ahead even when they tried. He pushed for things others hadn't thought of. Childcare vouchers tied to job interviews, meal programs that included after-hours pickups for single parents working night shifts, flexible emergency grants without mountains of paperwork. It was exhausting work, often emotionally draining, but for the first time in years, Brian went to bed feeling proud. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something, not just for himself, but for people like him. Back at home, things started to change too. He moved Lily into a better apartment. 2 bedrooms, clean walls, working appliances, no roaches, no mold. She had her own little bookshelf now, filled with donated storybooks. Every morning, she'd sit at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and draw pictures for him to take to work. Stick figure versions of Daddy helping people. One Friday, as they sat on the couch watching a cartoon, Lily turned to him and asked, "Daddy, are you famous?" Brian laughed. "What? No, sweetheart. Why would you think that?" "Because my teacher said you were in the paper." He blinked. "Wait, what?" She grinned. "Your picture. She showed me. You were talking to people and smiling." Brian checked online and found the article. Former waiter turns advocate for struggling parents. There he was, awkwardly frozen mid-laugh in a candid photo, speaking at a resource fair. The article praised the foundation, but more than that, it highlighted his story, his resilience, his empathy. Claire had clearly put the reporter in touch with him without telling him. Later, when he asked her about it, she shrugged. People need to see what hope looks like. You're doing that. Just by being you, months passed, then a year, then 2. Brian was promoted to Director of Outreach. He built programs from scratch, mentored new hires, spoke at conferences. He partnered with schools, shelters, and churches, expanding the foundation's reach to every corner of the city. He even started a podcast, just casual conversations with real parents, sharing stories that too often went unheard. And through it all, he never forgot how it started. One hot afternoon, a flat tire, a decision to stop when it would have been easier to keep driving. One day, Claire invited him to speak at an annual donor gala. He stood on stage in front of hundreds of wealthy benefactors in tuxedos and cocktail dresses. But he wasn't nervous. He looked down at the small photo in his pocket, Lily's drawing of him helping someone, and took a deep breath. "I'm not here because I was lucky," he began. "I'm here because someone saw value in something most people overlook. A tired single dad with grease on his hands. She saw a person worth believing in. And now, I get to spend every day doing the same for others." The room was silent, attentive. "This is how we change the world. Not all at once. One flat tire, one act of kindness, one person who decides to care." When the applause came, it was thunderous, and as Brian stepped off the stage, his daughter ran into his arms, her tiny voice whispering, "You were amazing, Daddy." He smiled, eyes stinging, and whispered back, "So are you, sweetheart. So are you."